Hello Cardinals team, and welcome back to your next video where you're going to take notes on the end of optimism and the Great Depression in Europe. Make sure that you write down all the green information on your graphic organizer for today. You should see this sheet in your baskets if you haven't gotten it out already. So, what's happening after World War I? We just finished World War I. Victorious countries experience a period of boom. So you may have heard of this in United States history. The country of the United States did very well in World War I. We were very successful, and our country was doing extremely well with economics in regards to political movements and motives. We were doing very well. So the United States and Japan came out of World War I in better financial shape than we were in before the war. Okay, we were having to do a lot of things back on the home front that really helped us to be successful in the long run. The Allied countries continued their alliances through international trade and economic cooperation. So the Allied countries still were doing very well and keeping in communication with each other. The Roaring Twenties was the name given to the good times in the United States in the 1920s. So what's going on in Germany in the 1920s? The new democratic government set up in 1919 was called the Weimar Republic. Okay, Germany had not increased taxes during World War I to pay for wartime supplies. So that's another reason why they're in economic trouble. So as a result, Germans simply printed more money to pay for the expenses of the war. It's called inflation. Okay, the value of the mark, which was the German currency at the time, declined. So the worth of that currency went down. That would be like the US dollar going down in worth if we just created more money to pay for something. So the cost of a loaf of bread in 1918 in Germany was less than 1 mark. In 1922, it was 160 marks. And in 1923, it was 200 billion marks. So people in Germany took wheelbarrows of money to buy their groceries. Many Germans began to question the value of their new democratic government and what this would mean for them. Okay, so how did the Great Depression begin? There was overproduction in the factories. Regular Americans were not able to purchase most goods. So your typical average American couldn't always afford all of those goods. It was mainly upper class that could do that. People in the United States had been overspending and buying on credit. So if your parents have a credit card, they normally will go to a store and maybe they'll purchase groceries at Target for the day. And then when they go home, they don't pay it off right away. They'll pay off that credit card because they put a credit on it. They will pay that amount off later on in the month. They're typically due at the end of every month. So the people in the United States were very tired of spending and buying on credit and having this credit that they had to pay off. Many Americans sometimes wouldn't pay that credit. So on October 29th of 1929, the stock market crashed. And this is a huge deal. Maybe some of your parents know a little bit about the stock market. So in 1929, it crashed. Americans rushed to the banks and withdrew all of their money, which forced all the banks to close because they had no money left. They weren't able to actually create their business and run their business at a bank as usual because of the stock market crashing. Many sold off all of their possessions after losing their jobs. They didn't have any money, so they decided they were going to sell what they had in order to have some money in order to survive in life. Unemployment and homelessness in the United States skyrocketed. The president at the time during the stock market crash and what would lead to the Great Depression was President Herbert Hoover. So they nicknamed these shacks and places where people were forced to live because the conditions were so terrible in our entire country during this time. They called these Hoovervilles. So if you look at this image to the right over here, you're seeing there that those are some of the shacks that were created where people would live and try to survive during this time period. Okay, next we've got the line of unemployed workers standing outside in New York City. I mean, unbelievable. People don't have jobs. And if you look here at this chart, I know you can't see the entire chart because of my face here. If you look at this chart here, you can see when Hoover is in his presidency, the unemployment rate is skyrocketing, okay, during the time period that he is president. Over here, it states that Franklin Delano Roosevelt becomes president around the time period of 1932, 1933, and he starts to pull down the unemployment rate. So that means people are starting to get jobs again. And you'll learn next year in 8th grade social studies that President Roosevelt came up with some great ideas that helped to boost the economy back up and get us out of this depression. Okay, so the ripple effects. Let's read about this. The United States stock market crash in 1929 led to a collapse of international trading. So we didn't even have enough goods or things to produce in order to trade with other countries. We just needed to stick with what we had going on in our country at the time. So we decreased trade between the United States and Europe. So that pulled down how much trade we were doing between the two superpowers and some of the larger countries that had a lot of power and were very successful during this time. The cutbacks in the production at the factories, so meaning we weren't producing that many things to trade, caused jobs to be lost. So that was another huge issue that we were dealing with here. And it also says here increased unemployment worldwide. Okay, worldwide is what it says underneath the screen. So worldwide unemployment was a huge thing that happened during this Great Depression and this time period of economic downturn where not many countries were able to trade with other countries. So you can say that the United States kind of sparked what was going to happen later on with this depression that was occurring. Okay, so if you look at this chart, you'll see the unemployment rate over here for Great Britain, Germany, and the United States. All are pretty much in unison. Things are not going very well. But if you look at that unemployment rate for Germany right here in the orange, it is declining majorly over here, okay? Great Britain, they're not doing super well with their unemployment, and then they start to kind of fix it. And same with the United States. We did a very poor job. We didn't have much unemployment, and then all of a sudden it skyrocketed when we had the depression, and then it's kind of leveled off here and slowly gone back down once Franklin Delano Roosevelt comes to become our president. If you look over here at world trade between 1929, when the stock market crashes through the United States, to 1933, world trade majorly declines in billions of dollars. I mean, look here, we start at 35 billion, and by 1933, there's only 10 billion. So this number is significantly dropping. All right, so looking inward, one immediate effect of the global depression was the decrease in international cooperation. People were not concerned about other countries. They were really only concerned about themselves and getting their country back in good shape and in good standing so that they were able to function as a country economically, politically, and socially. So countries began to focus on their domestic issues, and they ignored the global community. Like I said, they just focused on themselves. The lack of economic and political cooperation fueled the growth of nationalism. So if people aren't worried about other people, they're going to be worried about themselves, causing that nationalism to be very, very strong. So people are really only focused on themselves and how great their country can become. So here's the global impacts of the Great Depression. If you look here, you can see Canada, the United States, Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Chile. Major game changers here in Europe, key players, Poland, Germany, Britain, France, Austria, Russia, and Australia. These are nations that are affected strongly by the Great Depression. So what's going on with the Great Depression in Germany? Okay, we've looked at the United States. Now let's recenter our focus here on Germany, because this is what's going to really start rolling us into what's going to become World War II. So the economy was weakened by the Treaty of Versailles. We know that, right? We looked at our 4 factors of influence. We've got war guilt, war reparations, military restrictions, territorial losses. All of these things, okay, are causing the economy to be weak in Germany. They owe a lot of money, right? Those reparations are going to hurt. Inflation, remember rising prices like I just talked to you about, where they decided to create their own more of their bills instead of just paying certain things, okay? Extensive borrowing by the government, okay? Lots of borrowing from the government, and that way people are just borrowing from the government, not making a lot of money themselves. So a big issue going on in Germany at the time. Okay, this also says the German government responds by cutting public services. So they decided we have other issues we need to figure out, and we have other things we need to pay. So we're going to cut public services. We're going to cut water, trash, police, fire. What do you think that's going to cause, guys? A lot of chaos, okay? Not a lot of structure in Germany at this time. They also were refusing to pay back debt from World War I. They said, wasn't our fault. Why are we supposed to pay it? That's not how this works. So the use of emergency power by officials to enforce order and cooperation of German citizens was huge, okay? They decided that in order to enforce the laws and cooperation of German citizens, they had to use an emergency source of power. Okay, we're moving on to the next slide here. So we're going to look at the Great Depression in Great Britain. So Great Britain was weakened by the decreased borrowing from British banks, okay? People were not borrowing money from the British banks anymore. They were in their own depression, and they didn't have money they didn't have money in the banks. They took it out, so they didn't need to borrow from the British banks anymore. Their shipping weakened by the collapse of international trade. People weren't trading anymore, so they weren't having to have taxes on British waters for people to get through. So they weren't really making money there either. Okay, let's look here. The British government responds by protecting industries, meaning they put limits on the imports that were coming into Great Britain, and they maintained public services for citizens. Okay, so the government in Britain is trying to do some things to help with the Great Depression here. Germany, if we look and compare the two, not really doing too much to help that out. All right, so unemployment in Europe overall. The most visible sign of depression in European countries were long lines for food relief. A lot of people didn't have food. They didn't have money to afford food. So Food relief was a huge thing that was the most visible sign of depression. Rising unemployment, people not having jobs, that's also a large factor here. And if you look at this chart, you can see different similarities and differences between some of these countries. Okay, let's look here. If we're looking here in Germany, we have 2,484,000 people, okay, unemployed. That number just slowly begins to rise, and then it kind of decreases a little bit more. Okay, so very interesting to look at here. All right, so the Great Depression. These are soup lines in Europe. This is a picture of what this looks like. So here's some people, kind of like a soup kitchen, what you would think of that as. And here's what they would receive: 1 liter of soup per family, and it was 1 penny to buy a liter of soup. So that would get you through maybe a couple of days. All right, so what are the effects of the Great Depression in Europe? Let's look at these. There were demonstrations, there were strikes, there were protests. People were angry. Citizens were upset with the fact that their countries let them get to this state and weren't really doing much to help maintain order and maintain balance in their countries. Attempts to overthrow governments in Germany and Italy. People were very upset and did not like what the government was doing in Germany, didn't like what they were doing in Italy, so they attempted to overthrow their governments. Increasing support for new fascist leaders. So if they don't have a good government set up in the first place, they're looking for somebody else. They said, what's our hope? How can we find somebody who's going to help us get out of this depression? Which causes an increase in support for those fascist leaders who are going to come in and take control. An example of that, Adolf Hitler. This is also, prime example, rise of the Nazi Socialist Party in Germany led by Hitler, like I just said to you. Here's a German campaign poster. You can't see it very well here, but here's some folks standing out in a crowd, okay? And this says Hitler down here at the bottom. You can't really see it very well. It's a German campaign poster, a propaganda poster, and up here it says in German, "One last hope," or "Our last hope, Hitler." So the rise of Hitler. How did he come to power? What's going on here? What did he promise the Germans? The Nazis pledged to solve their problems, said that, we will help you get through this depression. We are going to make things better for our country. Hitler used Jews and other groups of society as scapegoats, which a scapegoat is someone that you're blaming your problems on, even if it's not really that person's fault. So Hitler was using Jews and other groups of society as scapegoats during this, and we'll talk about why in the next couple of days. People in Germany were tired of their poor quality of life. They didn't like the way that their lives were being lived, and they thought, well, maybe Hitler can make Germans really proud of who we are again. So he promised to make Germany proud. He also provided jobs to most of the people who were unemployed throughout Germany. He said, you don't have a job? I'm going to help find you a job. The government's going to get you jobs so that way we can boost our economy and try to grow again from this depression that we've been in. So what was his response to the Great Depression? Hitler launched his New Order plan the same year that U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt launched the New Deal programs. Like I told you earlier in this PowerPoint, Franklin Roosevelt is going to come in and have some great ideas to help get the United States out of the Depression. He calls that the New Deal, okay? So in the United States, we call that the combination of economic and social programs designed to provide relief to Americans. Now, the New Order in Germany had grand economic and social scheme built on beliefs such as racial superiority, military expansion, government control of industry, which is known as communism, and strict control of German citizens. Those two sound very different, don't they? How does Germany sound? Much more strict, much more structured. The New Deal sounds like a bunch of different programs and ideas that are going to help stimulate the economy. Germany, it sounds like it's full force. They're coming in with power, trying to really change the way that Germany is. So what's Hitler's response still to the Great Depression? He promised something to every part of society, and that is what made him attractive to many, many citizens and why they let him become their leader. Farmers, he said, I'm going to give you higher prices for your produce, what you're making, your crops that you're creating, making up for losses during the Depression. Unemployed workers, jobs building public works such as roads and stadiums. He said, we need more roads. We need more civilization in these rural areas. So I'm going to have you come and build some of these large things that are going to help our economy to grow. And so the middle class, he said, I'll restore the profits of small businesses and encourage spending by all citizens so we can go and spend money at these small businesses and help to grow and stimulate the economy. So what did he say about the unemployed, the people that didn't have jobs? Before he became chancellor meaning kind of like president for the United States, Hitler promised bread and work. This was the promise that he could not afford to break. So here's unemployment in Germany from 1933 to 1940. I mean, this is insane. And look at this. So in 1933, we have over 6 million people unemployed. And look how much this goes down just in 1 year. We go to 4 million. By 1940, so in 7 short years, we're down to hardly any people being unemployed. And you'll see that's because the Nazi Party comes to power.